Hi, kindergarten and first grade. Let's get back to our stories of the Pilgrims. What you're going to need is your blue folder. Mine's black. Remember, I said that. A pencil. And you're going to turn to this page that we worked on last week, where it had the picture of the new queen. And we wrote the sentence, "King James would not like to hear that," said the queen gently. Today we're going to color this picture. It's very small. I'm sorry. It came to us this way. I should have blown it up and put it on its own sheet. And we're going to hear more about the Pilgrims. This picture says, "On a wooden box sat a mother with her baby asleep in her arms." We're going to find out about that. So I'm going to begin reading. You can stop the video for a second and gather your things. And then you can push play and you'll hear me read. Don't forget to put a little color into these if you haven't, or you can be coloring on a separate sheet of paper while you're waiting for me to tell you what sentence we're going to write. All right, push pause if you need to now. Otherwise, I'm going to begin reading. This chapter is called Meeting in Secret. For a time, all went well, but after a few months, King James was told that the people of Scrooby were not going to Scrooby Church. Everybody knew there were men and women who worship God. So they must have meetings somewhere. One Sabbath morning, two strangers came to Scrooby. As they walked through the street, they noticed a number of people going into William Brewster's house. "I believe they are going there to worship," said one of the men. "I think so too, but we will wait until we are sure," answered the other. Far down the road, they saw a carriage coming, so they stepped behind a wall. The carriage came slowly on and turned into Brewster's gate. In it were John Robinson and his family. The two men knew this man was a pastor from the way he was dressed, and so knew that they had found the place where the people were at worship. A little later, they went into the house and up the stairs. There in the chapel, they found John Robinson preaching to his people, his little congregation. The strangers handed him a message from the king and left the room. Oh, wonder what's happening. Let's keep going. After Master Robinson had finished speaking, he read the message. Even the little children felt that this letter meant trouble for those who had come there to worship God. "My friends," said their pastor, "King James has ordered us to go to his church and worship according to the laws of England, or not worship at all. He says if we do not obey him, we shall be punished." Wow. Can you imagine? Punished for not going to a certain church? Boys and girls, we all go to different churches. Some of us go to the same church, but some of us may not even go to church on Sunday morning, but worship at home. Wow, they were going to get in trouble if they didn't do exactly what the king said. What could the good men and women do? They did not believe as the king did and thought it was not right for them to go to his church. They would not do what they believed to be wrong. For several minutes, all were silent. Then William Bradford spoke. "This house will be watched every Sabbath," he said. "This large, pleasant room has been our church home for a long time, but it will not be safe to meet here anymore." After talking for a while about the best thing to be done, the pastor prayed that God would help them and protect them, and all went sadly home. After some time, King James heard that the people were not yet going to the village church, and again he sent his men to Scrooby. "Watch William Brewster's house and take every man who goes there on Sunday," he said. The next Sunday, two soldiers watched the house. They watched the front door and the back door, but not a person did they see. Had the people obeyed the king and gone to the old church? No, indeed. The soldiers were watching the wrong house. If they'd been at the other end of the village, they might have seen where the people went to worship that morning. The next Sunday, the worshipers met at Dr. Fuller's, and the week after that at Master Allerton's. Each Sabbath, they met in a different house, and each Sabbath, the soldiers tried to find them. At last, they met only at night, where it was harder for the soldiers to see where they went. William Brewster was an elder in John Robinson's church. The pastor did not live in Scrooby, and sometimes he was not able to go to the meeting. Then Elder Brewster led the service. One very dark winter night, they again met at Elder Brewster's house. The last persons to come were Master Chilton and his little daughter, Mary. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she tried to untie her hood. "What is the matter, Mary?" asked Mistress Brewster, helping her to take off her wraps. "Are you cold?" "I had such a fright," said the child. "There are 2 soldiers at your gate, Mistress Brewster. Father and I did not see them until we were almost at the bridge. We did not look toward the house, but walked right by as though we were not coming here. When we were sure they were not following, we went around and came in by the stable gate." Elder Brewster looked out the window. Yes, there were 2 men walking up and down in front of the house. Here's Mrs. Brewster helping Mary take her coat off. "Brewster's house is still dark, and there is no one there," said one. "They are obeying the king very well. No doubt they are all asleep as we ought to be. I am stiff with cold," answered the other as they walked away. They would have been much surprised if they had seen the little group on their knees in the dark chapel upstairs. When the meeting was over, they did not all go home at once. The soldiers would notice so many people together and know that they had been someplace to worship. Still, King James did not believe the people were obeying him. He thought if these soldiers could not find where the meetings were held, he would send someone who could. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see if we can answer a few of these questions. What did 2 strangers notice about the Brewster's house? Does anyone remember? Couple things, and at different times. At first, they noticed that everybody was going there, and that Master Robinson, who was dressed like a pastor, had gone in. And then after that, were they trying to catch people coming and going from the house? Yes. What did the message from the king say? Do you remember? The letter that the 2 men walked in and gave to the pastor, Pastor Robinson? "King James has ordered us to go to his church and worship according to the laws of England, or not worship at all. He says if we do not obey him, we shall be punished." Wow. Can you imagine if we had to obey the president of the United States, or we'd be punished? Can you imagine if he said we couldn't go to church? Would you obey that? Would your parents obey that? Well, God calls us to obey the laws of the land, like right now. We're all staying at home. Sometimes we might have to do what God says. Let's see. Did the people go back to the Scrooby church, or did they continue to meet with each other? Oh, I know you know the answer to that. They didn't go back to that church. They didn't go back to King James's church. They continued to meet with each other. And here we're going to talk about why. Why did the king's soldiers have trouble finding where the people were meeting? Because they were meeting where? Over here, then over here, then over here, then over here. They were meeting at different people's houses. And finally, they ended up doing this. Let's see what number 5 says. What was happening in the Brewster's house when the soldiers saw that it was dark? What were the people doing? Let's read right here. The little group on their knees in the dark chapel upstairs. What were they doing on their knees? That's right. They were praying. They were praying and probably asking God for guidance. What should they do? If they couldn't go to a church where they didn't believe the doctrine or the guidelines of the church, kind of like the rules, but not exactly, more like the premises, more like the teachings of the church, whatever the church was teaching. If they didn't agree with that, they couldn't go to that church. So that's why they were meeting separately. And now they were having to meet in secret. All right, let's read our next chapter because we're not to this picture yet. We'll get there. Oops, sorry. This chapter is called For Conscience Sake. And here's a picture. What does that look like? Does that look like one of their meetings? It sure does. I wonder if it's going to tell us who this man speaking is. And there's all the women and children sitting together and people sitting on the floor, and it looks like they're in some kind of a warehouse, see, with crates and barrels, and some people look like they're covering up with a blanket maybe. It might be cold in there. All right, let's read and find out. Up in the loft of a large barn, John Robinson was teaching his people. Aha, that's who the man standing up was, John Robinson. He held his Bible in his hand, but he could not see to read it, for only the pale moon lighted the loft. They knew many chapters of the Bible, however, and repeated one softly. Wow. So they didn't only know verses, they knew whole chapters, like we learned Psalm 23 earlier this year, the whole chapter of Psalm 23. That's important in places of the world, even right now, where they can't worship together freely and they can't read their Bible, like in China. So the people have chapters of the Bible memorized. There are other places in the world where it's illegal to worship Jesus and read the Bible. Isn't that incredible? We have such freedom here in the United States. Let's see what happens. Suddenly they heard voices outside. I saw 2 men go into this barn, said one soldier. And I saw a woman and 2 children, said another. I believe they are meeting for worship. Let us find out. Come, men. Up in the loft, the people heard and trembled. The men tried to hide the women and children in safe places, then turned to face the soldiers. Up the old stairs they came. We have found you at last, they cried. Come with us. So the men were taken away to prison, and their families returned to their lonely homes. After a few weeks, the prisoners were set free, but still they would not attend the king's church. Many times they were put in prison, and some of their homes were burned. They were very, very unhappy. One day, the men of the little church met to talk about their troubles and plan some way to help matters. Wow. Can you imagine if your home was burned by the government of your country just because you didn't go to church? Wow. All right. Let's see what the next part says.